us, our Lord and Savior Minarchy. No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name's Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNradio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have
KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the number one way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
Thanks, JJ.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
Green man in the desert night, Bigfoot roaming out of sight. Government shadows, secrets deep, conspiracies unfold while we sleep. Strange encounters unexplained, truth is out that really chain. Men with knowledge, voices bold, unraveling history, stories untold. Area 51, a whispered name. UFO sightings, a haunting flame. Loch Ness monster, a watery myth. Cryptozoology, a curious gift. Strange encounters unexplained. Truth is out there, bravely changed. Men with knowledge, voices bold, unraveling mystery, stories untold. Skeptics doubt, believers yearn for answers hidden yet to learn. In the twilight zone where logic ends, the search continues with all hands. Strange encounters unexplained. Truth is out there, bravely chained. Men with knowledge, voices bold, unraveling mystery, stories untold. Truth is out there. Truth is out there.
Okay, never mind. Anyway, so I'm done fighting with I don't know. I restarted everything. I restarted the router, I restarted the modem, and we are still having gremlins. I blame the episode from 2 weeks ago, and I blame you. Just kidding. How you doing?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's entirely up to you to exercise the goblin verse from your shit.
I have
So,
tried. I have tried. I am still trying.
did you fix the ad roll stack?
Yes, I didn't even run that one today. I have a
Okay, well,
shorter one. I have a
I
shorter one.
noticed you didn't.
I have a shorter one I already put together. I just sometimes if I'm going to leave the room, I have the longer one loaded in case I need more time. So yeah, I don't know. I restarted. I did all the things, but yeah, it's weird because you mentioned that when you look at the KLRN radio one, it shows this blank square with untitled. Mine looks normal. Yours
Yeah.
looks weird. I don't know what's going on my side anyway.
See, on my feed, it looks normal. It's the normal box with,
Hey, you said
with
box.
what we're putting out. Hit box. With what with the feed we're putting out. But when I look at the KLRN feed, it's just this weird little box. I don't know.
And it says untitled. Yeah, I did that with me and Aggie yesterday. That's one reason why I made sure I came in early and restarted all my crap. But yeah, now it's doing it for me on yours, and it's doing it for you on mine, or the main. So I don't know. Anyway,
we'll just say that X is retarded tonight. Instead.
Well, I mean, the X is red. That's evergreen. So
X is always retarded.
But we do have the chats filling up. I see Al, I see Delaney, I see MD. So yeah, we got
Jeff's in there because he boosted the feed, and we got some people coming in on my feed, and yeah, first show of the year.
Yeah, that's the other thing that's kind of weird. I can normally see the ones that are coming through on your feed, and I don't right now.
No, I just mean people are coming in, not that they're chatting.
Well, no, I saw a couple that were purple a second ago that aren't purple anymore. Now I'm really confused. Anyway, it's okay. I'll get through it. I'm discombobulated, man. I'm discombobulated. Anyway, so how's your new year been so far? Other than
it's been
having springtime allergies in January. What the hell?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's it's like we were talking about before. It's not that I'm got allergies so much; it's that even though it's raining, it is like because I'm high desert, it's super fucking dry. So every breath feels like I'm getting. I don't know. Anyway, but yeah. So if I break out real quick, it's because I had to pause and cough up a lung, and then I'll be back. So anyway, that's what's going on with me. How about you? What's going on Rick's role? What's going on with Rick?
Well, I kind of had a bit of inspiration over this past week, so I have like 3 more songs coming out over the next 3 weeks. So, and then another friend of mine who writes music figured out that I was writing music again, so he's collaborating with me on a piece that I hope to have out in the next 2 weeks once I get his final draft back. So yeah, and then it's actually all starting to go out to like actual like YouTube Music and Spotify and all the cool places. So who knows? Anyway,
things be a clicking.
Like I keep telling everybody, I'm just trying to find as many different ways as I can to get some nickels alone together in the dark and hope they start breeding like rabbits. Because I can't say pennies anymore because they're going to stop making those.
Yeah, pennies don't exist anymore. Which is funny because that means everybody's going to hoard pennies.
Dude, they already have one on all the news channels. That's like, this is going to be your final chance to own the American penny, and it's like $9.95 a set, limit of like 20 for a roll of pennies. Like whatever, dude. Those
50-cent roll of pennies for $9.
Yeah, those don't even count anyway. Those are the ones that are always marked not for legal tender. They're just collector's items. And I'm like, I'm not paying $10 for $1 worth of pennies.
It reminds me when they started coming out with the state quarters.
Oh yeah,
and you can get for $20. You get sent the new roll as it came out, and it's like half of those they gave up after the third one. And they came out with that map that you could put the quarter into. Yeah, it was fuck.
Well, I mean, part of it is that there's a subsect of people that go completely nuts about that kind of crap. And I think that's part of why they just quit, because they had people like threatening to stab them because they were missing 2 or 3 of them for those stupid map books. And they were like, I'm going to stab you in the neck with a crazy straw if I don't get my Florida corner. I'm like, yeah, I think we're done. We're done with this. We're not doing it.
It's funny. By the time, I was moving between California and Nevada at the time. By the time they came out with either of those quarters, I was so done with it.
Not surprised.
Yeah.
Not surprised.
But so the topic du jour, since we all survived the goblins and those of you who didn't disappear over the holidays as missing holiday travelers, this is actually, by the time we're done, you're going to realize that the topic we're doing tonight, it cleanly plugs itself into 3 other distinct topics we talk about on the show. And in this case, we're talking about missing media. And what I mean by that is the first time an event happens, before the unease, before the implications, before anybody reaches for a theory, not belief, suspicion, or anything like that, nor it being internet lore passed around. These are actual grounded confirmation of specific recordings that once existed in the real world. They're not, ghost stories about tapes or things that might have aired. These are broadcasts that did air, were seen, were discussed, and were treated as real by the people who had no reason to imagine that they would later vanish.
I mean, so we're talking about basically a modern audience. They've been conditioned to treat absence as evidence of non-existence. So if something can't be pulled up on demand, if it doesn't surface through a search box, or if you can't find it when you're just scrolling or through an archive portal or anything like that, the reflex is to assume it never happened. That reflex is often convenient, but it's also historically wrong. For most of the broadcast era, television and radio were ephemeral by default, not permanent. Content moved through the world, once left impressions in human memory, and then kept going without leaving a durable footprint.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that these things vanished. Yeah, it's quite the opposite. There's an enormous amount of broadcast material that has survived, sometimes by design and sometimes by accident, and sometimes just because someone somewhere thought it mattered enough to keep it. The important distinction here is not between what was recorded and what wasn't, but between what existed and what can still be produced. And that's not the same category. And these things have, quietly distorted how the absence of these things has quietly distorted how we understand media history.
More specifically, there are news reports that explicitly reference footage which no longer exist. Articles written days or even hours after a broadcast will describe images, quotes, or sequences that can now no longer be located in any public or even private archives. These references are not vague. They include timestamps, station call signs, contextual details that only make sense if the writer had access to the material at the time of writing. The footage is treated as ordinary, not special, not something requiring an explanation, at least not at the time, until they figure out that it's vanished.
Yeah, and in some of these cases, later reporting builds on those vanished broadcasts. It's as if their availability would always be a given. Journalists will quote reactions to a clip, describe how it changed public understanding, or reference it as a shared point of context. And when modern researchers go looking for the original material, all they can find are the citation chains, and then it ends in thin air. It's all the references remain, but the object that they point to no longer does.
Error 404, file not found.
Right.
There are also broadcasts that people remember seeing once and only once, not as childhood haze or half-formed nostalgia, but as specific moments with clear content and placement. Viewers recall where they were, who they were with, what came on before and after. They remember because the broadcast was strange, disruptive, or emotionally sharp or charged enough to lodge itself in memory. And yet when they go looking for it later, nothing turns up, not even a degraded copy.
And what's striking is how often these recollections line up across people who don't know each other and didn't compare notes at the time. Independent witnesses describe the same segments, the same phrasing, the same visual beats. They don't claim that it's important. They just state plainly that they saw it. And the consistency with this is uncomfortable because it leaves little room to dismiss it. To dismiss it to the memory was an invention. It happened for them. It happened to them. All these people unconnected watched the same thing.
The interesting thing about this disappearing media that we're talking about is some of these lost records are still being cited in print sources, and those sources that cite them actually still exist and can actually be verified. This includes books, newspapers, trade publications from the time that will refer to a broadcast in passing, assuming the reader understands the reference. No footnote explains the clip because at the time there was no explanation needed. The broadcast was recent at the time of the writing or the recording, and very easily accessible and presumed to be part of what we would consider the permanent record.
Yeah, and that presumption is doing a lot of work. Excuse me. It rests on the assumption that feels natural now, but it wasn't guaranteed then, that once something is broadcast, it enters the permanent archive somewhere. The idea that a national or local transmission would simply evaporate feels wrong to us in a culture that relies on redundancy and backups. But that feeling is that the product of the present is not. It's not a rule of the past.
Yeah, I mean, especially when your entire military, each branch kind of has their own department of the redundancy department. That seems kind of
Right.
counterintuitive. But listener calibration also matters here, and it doesn't require dwelling. Most people already accept that missing television episodes exist. Entire runs of early programming are known only through scripts, production stills, or audio recordings captured off of a speaker. Nobody disputes that these episodes aired. Nobody argues that there's some sort of mythical beast and their absence is treated as unfortunate but normal.
Yeah, and the same is true with one-time sketches or special segments, live variety shows, experimental broadcasts, or regional programming material. This went out and then it was never repeated. They are these are acknowledged losses. They're trivia questions with known answers. They sit comfortably in the category of things we wish we still had. But some of these things they should exist, but they don't.
The problem is that this acceptance quietly stops at the edge of convenience. Once the missing material becomes unsettling, once it involves news, real world events, or some moments that shaped public understanding, the tone changes. Skepticism creeps in. People start asking whether it really aired, whether memories are exaggerations, whether the references were misunderstood. And that shift is not evidence based, it's emotional. It's easier to accept loss when the stakes feel low and harder when the missing material implies that our picture of the past might be incomplete in a meaningful way. The mind looks for reasons to downgrade certainty because certainty would force uncomfortable questions. Like, for instance, where did the Shazam movie go?
Right. Yeah, and what we're not going to be discussing the meaning or the motive or pattern. It's simply that the baseline fact that broadcast media once operated under conditions where disappearance was not only possible, but it was common. The infrastructure didn't prioritize total retention, and the culture didn't expect it. And the people consuming the media had no reason to believe they were witnessing something fragile. And that's what makes some of what is lost, what we'll be talking about tonight, so much more disconcerting, because in a time when everything was just kind of ephemeral, when you didn't care about the weather broadcast on the 6 o'clock news in 1982, but the story that came on before it was absolutely of national importance, and no archive of it remains.
Hey, the weather girl on the broadcast in 1982, some of us cared about her, bro.
Oh man, I had such a thing for the one of the original chicks on the Weather Channel, the one with the long hair. Anyway, yeah.
Oh yeah. But there are tapes that were reused, films that were wiped, and recordings that were never cataloged because nobody thought future access mattered. That explains how loss happens mechanically. It does not explain why specific things, specific referenced witness things, are gone while adjacent material survives intact. And that's the part that's kind of
and that's really what this is all about. At this point, explanations are pretty irrelevant. The only thing that matters is resisting the temptation to resolve the discomfort we have in this tour. Once you allow yourself to say it probably never existed, you close the door on wondering why it's gone in the first place. You replace evidence with convenience and call it skepticism.
Yeah, some of us aren't so good at that, which is why we do a show about some of this stuff every year.
Yeah.
So the historical record, thin as it sometimes is, keeps pushing back against that move of trying to bring calm to the storm of your mind when you realize there's some missing information. It keeps presenting artifacts that point to something just off screen, just out of reach, a citation without an object, a memory without a tape, a reference without a source, and it just keeps persisting.
Some of the things we're going to be talking about tonight, these aren't just isolated curiosities. They appear across decades, formats, and genres: news and entertainment, local programming, national broadcasts, different institutions, different technologies, but they all have the same outcome: a confirmed transmission that cannot now be retrieved.
And the instinct is to treat this as some sort of a bookkeeping error or an issue where maybe the tapes were destroyed or something. There's some sort of an archiving failure rather than what in some cases can be a substantive problem. But bookkeeping failures still leave traces. Ledgers don't usually forget selectively. When loss clusters around certain kind of material, it stops looking random and starts looking structured. Remember, guys, I'm the guy that doesn't believe in coincidence. So when certain things just keep coming up missing in the same kind of stuff, you just really have to start wondering.
Yeah, the purpose of this first pass on this topic, it's narrower and more stubborn. We're with it. We're going to establish that we're not chasing ghost rumors or misremembered anecdotes. What we're dealing with are real broadcasts that left footprints in other media and in human memory.
And once that is accepted, the comfortable assumption collapses, and suddenly your mind's desire and need to make sense out of things that are missing kind of disappears, and there's this fear that starts gripping you. Think about some of the things that we've talked about on our Mandela Effect shows, where we're all watching the clips of "I am your father," and instead of it being "No, I am your father," he says, "Luke, I am your father." That's how we all remember it. I mean, I haven't met a single person who says it the other way. Not one. And once we came across that again, I've actually there was a time after we did that first show, anytime I talked to anybody I knew, I was like, okay, I need you to quote the line for me when he's hanging off the thing right after Darth Vader cuts off his hand. And everybody says it the other way. The way that we found in James Earl Jones' dry read, but not in the actual movie. So that's when things start just nagging at the back of your mind, going, why is this different? I mean, I talked about it the other day with Stranger Things. I remember them specifically saying season 4 was it, and I remember a completely different ending for season 4 than I found when I started watching everything again with Netflix to get ready for season 5. I'm like, this isn't even how the last episode that I remember for this season ended. And it was unsettling. I mean, so sometimes you're left with a quieter, sharper question that doesn't go away on its own. And sometimes you're left with this screaming feeling in the back of your head that something is terribly wrong. And I find that mine aren't very quiet anymore. I'm kind of starting to be left with that screaming thing, because if these things existed, why don't we have them? And in some cases, if they didn't exist before, why the hell do they exist now?
You're right. I mean, that's kind of, with the Mandela effect as an example, and a couple other things we talked about on the show that I'll bring up at the end. But it's, why is it on these specific things, but other things that are of equal importance nationally, collectively, whatever, all of that chaotic, discordant early reporting remains. But with some of these things we're going to be talking about tonight, there's still some of it's still there. But for those of us who lived through it, the volume of the material that was out there is absolutely truncated. And again, compared to other equally important things that were happening around the time that, you can remember a specific broadcast or whatever and go and find it. But it's like an example of that recently was, when we were, when the Venezuela thing happened, and there were people were upset that Congress wasn't notified. I said, don't you guys remember when CNN was waiting for the Marines when they landed in Somalia? Then I went looking for it. I could find one clip of it, a shitty, barely watchable version of Christiane Amanpour standing on the beach as the Marines were landing. That was everywhere, but I could only find one clip, and I had to dig for that fucking thing.
Nice. So it looks like the folks in the chat have some stuff that they feel like kind of fits the category that we're talking about. It looks like Al was referencing there was an F-16 incident over Ann Arbor. Looks like 9/12/2001 that I guess they can't really seem to find much reference of anymore. Looks like Ubiquitous Everyman mentions the spider scene from King Kong that's now gone. Which I have to admit, I don't remember there being a spider.
I do
scene.
remember it. I do remember it. It's terrifying.
I'm chalking that up to that Mandela effect thing again. But okay, that's actually an interesting take. Mandela rumor was because of Peter Gabriel's Stephen Bilko video, and people got Nielsen mixed up. but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and that tracks. But and I want to make clear that this isn't necessarily a Mandela effect show, because we do that in April, every April. But this is just
Wait, did
it's
we
one of
time,
those things that
did I timeline jump again? Because I thought we usually did that in March.
oh, that's right, March.
Don't do
I
that
think we
to
did
me.
the last one so close to April, it's in my brain. When I was a kid, I thought my birthday was in September because my birthday is so close to the end of September. I actually accused my parents of changing it.
Well, no. See, what happened was that was your first timeline jump.
Right there, exactly.
Where you
Yeah,
came from?
it's
Where you came from? Your
it,
birthday was in fact in September.
right. Yeah, then once we jumped, it was in October. So, but yeah, this isn't a Mandela effect show, but it has the vibe that it could be part of it, and why some Mandela effects exist.
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily a Mandela effect show, but at the same time, there's so many tendrils of this stuff that kind of lead into, like you were talking about earlier. There's so many tendrils of this stuff that lead into so many different topics that we talk about. That for me, one of the biggest ones is the Mandela effect stuff. Because, dude, I still find stuff like every week. I find new stuff that I was like, "Hey, that's not how I remember that. What the hell's going on?"
Yeah.
It's just something that never changes for me. It's always like, and you know me. I mean, granted, I don't have like complete total recall like I used to, but I still have a good enough memory where when something's not jibing, my brain goes, "What?" Yeah,
Right.
that's
And
a
then
very
you go down a rabbit hole to find out why.
that's a
Which is
very
what I do.
unsettling that's a very unsettling feeling for somebody that has pretty good recall when you're like, "I specifically remember this happening this way, and now you're telling me it didn't." So
Mhm.
very, very unsettling, very unsettling. But it
Well,
looks
we
like
got 2 songs from Jeff. What's that?
I was gonna say it looks like we've hit the point for the first break, and I was about to say we do actually have 2 songs from Jeff tonight, so you guys don't have to hear the same one twice. So,
No, usually they're more in it, but yeah, he kicked down 2 for us tonight. So, and both of them jam. So we're gonna hit the first one as soon as the monkey flips the switch.
and I'm hoping that the little trick I did right at the opening of the program fixed the glitches. If not, I'm gonna go scramble out and reset my router one more time. But we'll be right back either way.
We know there's air, we know it breathes Inconvenient footage that refuse to congeal. Doctors, ghosts, and monochrome laugh once, then gone by dawn. Regional signals never synced. 1,000 truths collapse to one. If this existed, why don't we have it now? If it was witnessed, why won't it come around? The record narrows, time agrees, memory trims what history sees. So we don't ask who took it away. We ask what survived and why that stayed. Because absence doesn't need intent, just time. And consensus ain't good enough in the end.
And welcome back into the program, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you enjoyed that piece. And again, we have a fresh one for hour 2 as well. Although I don't necessarily mind playing the music more than once, but it's kind of cool that we have 2. Anyway, so
We should probably play that one at the top of the hour again because that was quite a chunk missing.
yeah, I probably will, because I wasn't sure if it translated. It was weird because it kept playing on my side, so it doesn't normally do that. Normally I get all kinds of error messages because I had to go sneak off and reset my router. Normally I get like all kinds of lost connection, trying to reestablish connection. I didn't get any of that, so I wasn't sure how much of it went out or not. But so I'll probably run that one at the open instead of the regular.
Yeah, I was monitoring the main feed, and we had a good 90 seconds of dead air. That's all right. Back.
Well, it used to take like 5 minutes before they replaced my router. So at least that's one thing. Now it takes about half.
There's that.
So there is an improvement. I still
back in the day, we would go dead air for 20 minutes, just dealing with Spreaker and shit. Excuse me. God, that's getting to me. I'm getting sick. I mean, 2 weeks in a row. Jesus.
Yeah, I wondered if that was Jeff, because that part of it definitely sounded organic. Yeah, apparently the bass riff in that was him.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, when you sent it to me, I'm all, you know what? It's kind of like 311 meets Red Hot Chili Peppers, but good.
I don't know. Well, I mean, I guess there is evidence that 311 meets Chili Peppers can be good now, but I don't know if that ever existed before. Anyway, so yeah. Anyway, so yeah, what we'll do is I'll probably run that at the end of hour 1 into hour 2, so that way everybody can hear the whole thing, and we'll play the other one at the middle. Because hopefully, now that I've hopefully reset my router twice, we shouldn't, let me find some wood to knock on, have this problem again, because I don't know why it's being extra cranky lately, but it is. But anyway, so we're back, and
if not, shoot it.
It's expensive if I shoot it, though. Sometimes I'm not gonna lie, it has occurred to me. But anyway.
So
all right, so where did we leave off? All right, that's right. Yeah, we had just finished the whole, if these things existed, why are they gone? What happened? I blame the CIA.
Yeah, or the NSA or whatever. Yeah, because I mean, chat's not even let Al retell a story about a F-16 event on 9/12 in Michigan. So yes, we are being monitored.
Well, if all of a sudden there's black helicopters, Delta Force, and a sound device being deployed in my studio, we'll all know why.
Yeah.
Oh wait, never mind. Too soon?
Too soon. Yeah. So in all these events, I mean, in all reality, there's a narrow window after an event occurs where reality exists without a narrative. Facts are incomplete and reactions are unguarded. Yeah, and the people tasked with explaining what's happening don't yet know what the explanation is supposed to be. And in this window produces material that feels unstable even years after because it captures uncertainty and motion rather than resolution. And as it's also the window where recorded media is most likely to thin out, fragment, and disappear entirely.
So early local television coverage of September 11, 2001 is a prime example, and it sits squarely in that window. Before the national feed stabilized, before graphics packages were standardized, local affiliates were reacting in real time with limited information and no script. Anchors speculated openly, correspondents contradicted each other, and control rooms struggled to decide what to show and what to cut away from. Newspapers published the next day referenced specific moments from these early broadcasts that are now impossible to locate.
Yeah, and these weren't obscure stations operating out of basements. These were major local affiliates in large markets, broadcasting to millions of viewers. People remember watching their familiar morning anchors lose composure, hearing incorrect theories floated and then withdrawn, and seeing camera angles that never appeared again once the national feed took over. These aren't vague recollections. You know, they include wording, tone, and a sequence of events.
I would like to point out that we do not broadcast from a basement. I just feel like I need to say that. Just anyway. So, what survives overwhelmingly is the cleaned up versions. The national feed, once it locked in, became the historical spine of the event. That feed was archived, duplicated, and rebroadcast endlessly. The local feeds, which preceded it and shaped initial understanding in their regions, exist now as rumors with footnotes. The rawness did not scale, and so it didn't endure.
Yeah, another example of this is the Challenger disaster. And it's a different texture, but the same outcome. On January 28th, 1986, countless classrooms across the United States were watching the launch live as part of a planned educational broadcast. Teachers had turned on the televisions expecting a routine event with a predictable script, and instead, students and educators witnessed something that no one was prepared to contextualize.
Did you remember where you were that day? Because I do.
I absolutely not only do I remember where I was that day, I remember exactly what I was wearing.
Well, that's an interesting detail. What were you wearing? I feel like I'm in the
uh, no, I remember because I was stoked. I had just gotten my first Pal Peralta t-shirt.
So yeah, this happened the year that we moved to Seattle. I was in sixth grade, what would have been seventh grade if I hadn't been held back a couple years prior. But we were at their version of, I don't know if you guys have anything like it out where you are, but we have something here called the Omniplex, which is kind of like where everybody goes with all the science stuff and has all the cool stuff that kids can play on and all this. So they had something like
I've been to a few. We don't have one locally, but yeah.
Yeah, so we went to one in the Seattle area that was kind of similar, a lot bigger than what I was used to, but still similar. And we had no idea what was going on. So we're getting driven home by the bus driver from the field trip, and she just decides to tell us that, that while we were at our field trip, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded. None of the kids believed her at first. So they started laughing and joking and everything else. She pulled over the bus and just started bawling. And that's when a lot of us were like, oh my God, she wasn't kidding. Dude, I was a mess for days. I'm not even going to lie. I don't know. I mean, I'm probably what, 12 years old, maybe. I was just a mess, dude. I mean, because space was always my thing. That was one of the things my dad and I had in common. I wasn't good at sports. I tried to play them, but I sucked at them. So our thing we connected with was like Star Trek and sci-fi and stuff. So space was always kind of my thing. And that was all. I was like, one of these days I'm going to figure out how to get up there. Of course, never did. But yeah, so when that happened and I found out it was legit, dude, I was like messed up for days.
See, and the reason why this is important, and if you weren't around when this happened, is that it wasn't just that there was like a national feed that everybody was watching, but like a lot of local affiliates, especially in the bigger markets, went to a classroom in a school and was filming this thing because this was a big nationwide educational project. So a lot of film, news crews were in classrooms recording, and this is the material that we're talking about that's missing now. Is because what followed in those classrooms wasn't silence after the Challenger exploded. Teachers spoke, students reacted. Some educators attempted immediate explanations, and others just absolutely were struggling with it. Contemporary accounts describe different narrations happening simultaneously in different rooms, depending upon the feed and the delay. The teacher's own understanding of trying to explain their own understanding what had occurred. And the reactions were part of this broadcast environment, not separate from it.
Well,
It
so
was like a lot of it wasn't the feed of the Challenger exploding. It was the feed of the classroom watching the Challenger explode.
yeah, the classroom kids watching the Challenger explode. It's funny because I've talked about this before and how different things are. Because now, if something like that happens, class is dismissed, kids go home. That didn't happen with the Challenger, and it didn't happen in '82 when Reagan was shot either. Hell, I was sitting in the floor watching Reagan get shot on national TV in my second grade classroom. Teacher hurried the cart out of the room and said, "Okay, kids, time for spelling tests." Now they're just like, "Oh, it's terrible. Everybody go home." I think that's part of the reason why he's a bunch of freaking wussies now. But anyway, so there's only a narrow canonical. I don't know how to pronounce it that way.
Canonical.
Version of that moment survives now. It is the clean feed of the launch, the explosion and the cutaway, the surrounding context, the classroom audio, the kids freaking out, the local commentary, the immediate attempts at sense making have been reduced and sanitized, if they exist at all, to anecdote, and in most cases just a footnote with no record that anybody can even find anymore. This is despite the fact that those reactions were at the time integral to how the event was experienced by an entire generation. Like I said, that's what happened with us. All the kids were cutting up because they thought the bus driver, they were like, "Oh my God, this bus driver is cool. She's making jokes." And then she pulled over and just started bawling. And that's when even the asshole kids in the back of the bus were like, "Okay, guys, we took this too far." I think that's the only time I ever heard asshole kids in the back of the bus go, "Yeah, we're going to stop now."
Right. We're all just going to take a moment here. And then, it's the newspapers and the educational reports from the period. They all reference these classroom broadcasts directly. They quote teachers describing what they said in the moment, the students recalling what they heard on television. And the implication of it is clear. There was more than one version. There was more than one reality of this broadcast experience. Yet only one reality of it remains.
And of course, that's the one that's now the official visual record. The Zapruder film introduces a third, quieter example that exposes this exact same pattern. When the film was first shown to journalists and broadcasters in the days following President Kennedy's assassination, it was not treated as a static artifact. It was a shock. Studio reactions were immediate, emotional, and unscripted. Anchors and commentators reportedly struggled to describe what they were seeing as they saw it. Kind of like with all the stuff we've been Challenger was the same way. The Reagan shooting was the same way. So
9/11. The thing is print recording or print reporting from that period references these first reactions explicitly. Writers describe how broadcasters paused, they corrected themselves, or they completely fell silent while the film ran. These descriptions are not sensationalized; they're observational. They suggest the act of viewing the film publicly was itself a broadcast event, like everything else we've been talking about. And it's distinct from the film as an object, and it's distinct from the event in that this is a real, visceral human moment that has been completely sanitized down to grainy footage.
And the freaky part about all this that we're talking about, with all these different reactions from everything from Kennedy to the space shuttle to even some of the stuff that happened with the reaction when Reagan was first shot, all those things. So the scariest thing about all this is that those reaction broadcasts, they don't even exist now. The film that we're discussing, the Zapruder film, it survives in multiple copies and generations. It's been endlessly analyzed frame by frame. The moment of first publicly processing the instant when trained professionals confronted the footage without preparation has vanished. What remains is interpretation without the record of initial interpretation that was the forming event for all of this. And I think that's the part that I find the most unsettling, because when you had trained professionals actually viewing the footage for the first time in an unprepared state, and that part has disappeared, I think that's one of the things that has led to so many different conspiracy theories regarding Kennedy.
No,
Because-
absolutely. Well, and then across all these cases, the same pressure point emerges without it needing to be theorized. The rawer the moment, the less likely the record survives. The closer a broadcast is to unfiltered reality, the thinner its archival footprints become. It's just an observation, but it keeps reappearing when you line up the material.
And it's tempting to attribute this to technical limitations alone. Tape was expensive, storage was finite. Not everything could be saved, but that explanation weakens when you notice what was saved. Polished summaries, official statements, and stabilized, sanitized feeds survive at a much higher rate than chaotic transitional material from the same events.
I mean, for those of you who are around in the age of broadcast television's heyday, that there is a very good chance that there was some absolutely quirky, weird video, a commercial, for a local car dealership or something that has long since gone out of business, that remains in the archives of the TV station that broadcast it. But not their unguarded moments when they're watching a national tragedy unfold.
Yeah.
What's that?
No, go ahead. I lost my train of thought because I was about to mute because trying not to cough in your ear.
Okay. Well, but it's like the witness accounts even reinforce this unevenness. People who watch these early broadcasts often describe a sense of disorientation that doesn't match the historical record as it's now presented. They remember hearing things that were later declared false, seeing reactions that were deemed inappropriate, and feeling the uncertainty that it's been edited out of the story. It's no longer historically accurate.
So, that mismatch creates a subtle but persistent tension. The official record feels too composed, too polished, I guess would be another way to put it. Too quickly resolved. It moves from shock to explanation with a speed that doesn't align with lived experience. The missing broadcasts sit in that gap, implied but not absent. And I know this isn't part of what we were going to be talking about today, but the mindset of this, the stuff that we're talking about, we've actually been watching this kind of play out in real time with some of the events that have been happening this week, because you have people reacting to footage in real time and they're seeing completely different things about it at the time because it's so raw and emotional for them. So I can kind of understand why some of the sanitation happens to a point, because sometimes people when they're angry or they're over emotional, they get it wrong, and we're seeing a lot of that. So I kind of understand some of why that happens, but the fact that they don't still leave it as an example of, hey, this is what we thought in the beginning, this is what we found out later. The fact that they've kind of they've unarchived it, that's the part that freaks me out, because if it were me, I would want the entire record, because then you can explain, hey, this is what was happening in real time. This is when everybody was emotionally charged. You can see that they got this wrong or this wrong, and this is why we talk about it this way now. I think, and this is just an observation from what's been going on for the last few days, if we were doing that with these events, we would have a much better time processing what's happening right now, right in front of us, I think.
I think that's accurate too. But I mean, it's also indicative of social media, and one of the things that we're watching unfold in real time, and the real indictment of it is this is an actual significant world event that is being completely ignored by all media. The only reason we know anything about it at all is social media, and that's what's happening in Iran. When the Shah was overthrown, you couldn't go 5 minutes during the day without getting a news update. But for some reason, this one is completely shut out.
Well, it is for now. I'm actually putting together a special for tomorrow night because I'm tired of nobody talking about it. So,
well, right, but I heard you mention that last night. But I mean, with the big four, CNN, NBC. Yeah, I think there was like a 30-second spot on CBS a couple nights ago. We're on day 13 now, but whatever. And Okay. This isn't about accusing intentional erasure. At this point, the motive behind it all is pretty irrelevant. What matters is that the outcome is constantly repeated. Material that captures confusion does not travel forward in time as the material that resolves it.
And institutions, by necessity, tend to always gravitate towards this point of clarity. They stabilize narratives to function, but stabilization has a side effect. It privileges certain recordings and marginalizes others, even when all were equally real at the moment of transmission. And again, that's kind of what we're talking about tonight. I feel like that has been a mistake of our society. We need to remember those raw moments too, because then because when you see that people in the heat of the moment can and do see things differently, especially now that everybody can be a reporter. I think that would help so much more with all of this, not only what's happening with Iran, but everything else. Because this whole idea of just, I don't know, it just occurred to me that I feel like we're kind of this is gonna the stuff that we're talking about, the stuff that's going on this past week, third week, 2 weeks. These are gonna be the events that 30, 40 years ago. There's gonna be somebody doing a show like this one talking about these days. I already
Right.
know.
Yeah. And the thing is that what it does is, while uh, the cleaning up, the narrowing it all down to one feed, it makes the historical record seem quite comprehensive, but also for those of us who lived through it, it's incomplete. It's completely saps all the emotion that we had felt at that time during these events. And it's like, the archive, contains all the answers, but not the questions that were asked in the first place. It shows the conclusions, but not the uncertainty that preceded them.
You know what this reminds me of? Your algebra teacher screaming that you're not showing your work. That's what this reminds me of.
No, this is absolutely not showing your work. It's when you look at the historical record, and society, no society has ever had all the answers. Complete record of the events, but when you look at it now, you're looking at it, it's like, well, a good example is, like, say you're watching footage for 9/11, and then you see the broadcaster, because this was an important broadcast and it's part of the archive, the broadcaster will say something that seems like an answer to a question nobody asked. But at the time, it was a very valid question.
Yeah, but if you're, I mean, like you said, if you're looking at it from, sometimes days, weeks later, all of a sudden there's a question that's being asked, and you're like, where are being answered that it seems like nobody asked, but at the time it actually was. But that's actually kind of the next point here. So this narrowing, or this sanitization, happens really quickly, sometimes within hours, sometimes days. Once the canonical version has been established, earlier variants, according to those that are controlling the narrative, lose their perceived values. They become redundant, confusing, or even embarrassing artifacts of not knowing yet. And again, I think that's part of it. I think we are as a species, we are so antithetically opposed to feeling embarrassment that we always try to do everything we can to whitewash even the bad events as best as we can, instead of leaving an accurate record at the time so everybody knows exactly what was going on. And this goes back to one of the oldest lessons that I ever remember hearing from one of my history teachers. Those who don't understand history are doomed to repeat it. If you're sanitizing your history, all you're doing is making sure that at some point somebody in your future is going to be repeating your same mistakes, because they're not going to know what you went through to get to that point. And that's why this stuff becomes so important to me.
Yeah, but the thing is that all these things, all those embarrassments, all those missed moments, those, that raw emotion, now it just slips through the cracks. Not with any drama and not or declarations. It just happens with a shrug. The tapes aren't requested, and so their recordings aren't duplicated. It's not prioritized, and so time just does the rest. And, like, there- Everyman was talking about in chat, so they were all on old Betamax and tapes were expensive, so they just got reused every couple weeks or once a month. But it's still, what remains from that time is just such noise, but the actual events, where the noise was important, doesn't.
Yeah, so the whole thing about with this whole sanitization process and the missing pieces, so what remains is a record that from everybody outside looking in that maybe wasn't in those specific moments or coming into it weeks, months later, these things feel they feel authoritative precisely because it lacks visible seams. The rough edges have all been trimmed away. The pauses, the wrong turns, the moments of human processing under pressure. Those exist now only as a reference without reference. I mean, everybody talks about with Kennedy. I think it was one of the first times I think it wasn't it Cronkite that covered the Kennedy assassination for one of the channels, I think. And he was
Yeah,
on
so, yeah.
he was on for hours entirely unscripted. And I remember my grandparents talking about that for decades after the fact because it was the first time that they could remember anything like that happening that was able to be captured in a television medium, and they were just watching, and that's part of what earned Cronkite the reputation that he had because he was stuck in a moment having to do this job and it was talking about one of the worst things that could happen in American history, and that's what earned him a lot of his reputation, especially with a lot of the boomer crowd and the silent generation was watching him be able to carry on in such a professional manner on live television, watching one of the worst things that could possibly happen. And I mean, and I remember my grandparents talking about it, and at one point, I even remember my dad talking about it because of how much having and watching hearing watching his dad watch it impacted him, and his dad always talking about it. But that's part of why I think these records do matter and they should matter. And that's I think one of the bright spots of almost everything being archived online now is there I don't think there's going to be as much absence of information as we've had before, but sometimes I also think there could be an overload of information. So I'm not sure. Now I'm trying to find the delicate balance between not enough and too much because I feel like the last few days have been too much in some circles and not enough in others. Kind of like we're spending all this time focusing on the Minneapolis stuff, and nobody's talking about the fact that we could be watching, 1978 Iran in reverse if we were actually paying attention.
Yeah, and one of the things about this, going what you're talking about, especially with social media, is the fact that, and what we're talking about isn't malicious. It isn't intentional. It's just attrition. And but it's weird how that attrition revolves around certain events. And going to what you were talking about with social media, we have the other end of it where it absolutely was intentional, where the reference material that people were quote tweeting, that people were talking about, that people were getting their information from, those accounts were suspended during COVID or suspended during the 2016 election or the 2020 election. And the video reference is completely gone. It's a good example of that is Trump's tweets where he was telling everyone to be peaceful and respectful when his account was suspended from Twitter. That reference material was gone intentionally.
Funny how that
So a
happened.
narrative could be made. Yes, weird, right? So, and that's the thing is in these instances that we're talking about, and we're going to continue to talk about, the unlike with 2020 and COVID, this pattern doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself only when you notice how often the earliest material is missing and how consistently other material has survived. It's a behavior that you can observe without explaining it. And really, there's no sense in reaching for a theory right now. It's just the discomfort around why this happens around specific events so fucking always. That needs to exist on its own. It speaks for itself.
Yeah, I mean, reality when it first intrudes leaves a fragile record, and that fragility repeated often enough stops looking like coincidence.
Which you don't believe in the first place.
Yeah, I was gonna say which I don't actually believe in to begin with. I am a firm believer that there's no such thing as coincidence. I've seen it happen way too many times in my life where, I mean, just like, we talk about it on the show all the time. Just talking about Kennedy, it used to be, 15, 20 years before conspiracy theory would be confirmed as a potential conspira fact. Now you've got anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months, depending on how quickly the information comes out.
Or 6 days sometimes.
This is true too.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
That's like-
we have officially ended the hour one portion of the program. So we're going to go ahead and rerun the song that Jeff produced for us for hour one, since I did have to clean up a technical issue there. And it seems like everything's running a lot smoother now. So I'm hoping that you guys can actually hear the whole thing. I got to hear all of it, but for like 45 seconds when I ran out to reset my router, which is another, like I said, that confused me though, because normally when I reset it, it loses anything that I have tied to the computer, and it didn't this time. So I was really confused. But anyway, we're not, no more goblin stories for a while. Okay. We're not coming back to that topic for a while. I'm making an executive decision. But
we even done demons or witches after those juxtapovers? I don't think we have. I think
No,
we've stayed far away
no.
from that topic.
no, I think this will be another one that will be in our verboten.
Goblins are now verboten too. Okay.
I was going to say, I think that will be another set that will be in our verboten pile for a while. All right, but we'll be right back, guys. This should give you, if you want to hang out and listen to all of it, that's great. If not, this would be a great time to get up, stretch your legs, grab a drink, maybe smoke a little bit. What else you think? Unless you're at work. But then again, even if you are, I'm probably not your boss, and I don't judge.
We know this air, we know it breathes the room. I witnessed time stamped in the margins, footnotes, written faces, pale. A thing that was and then was not. The tape was real, the signal ran, the light went red. So tell me why the shelf is clean and silence fills the space instead. If this existed, why don't we have it now? If it was spoken, who unspoke the sound? No fingerprints, no broken locks, just absence wearing reasons. Crown down, down, round, round, round. When reality was unprocessed, voices shaking, anchors unsure. Before the script, before the crawl, before the language learned control. Hey. Classroom watched the sky go wrong. Studio froze mid-sentence. First reactions never reran. Too raw to pass the edit fence. If this existed, why don't we have it now? Live when truth still stumbles, still didn't know how to bow. The rawer of the moment, the faster it fades. History prefers what behaves. Not dangerous, not secret, not locked behind a seal. Just inconvenient footage that refuse to congeal. Doctors, ghosts, and monochrome. Laugh once, then gone by dawn. Regional signals never synced. 1,000 truths collapse to one. If there
And welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen. And because he couldn't put it in the chat, I'm glad I saw this because my phone was in the other room, so I snuck out to grab it real quick. Al texted me the event that he was trying to let us know about in chat. So I actually have the notes on it now. And now that he's told me what he was wanting to tell us about, I remember this. I remember this. So this was the day after 9/11. And welcome back into the program, by the way, everybody. You're listening to Juxtaposition. I'm Rick. He's Orty. You're not, but thank you for hanging out with us. So the day after 9/11, a Piper twin engine was intercepted by two F-16s over the skies of Ann Arbor. The incident was about 5 minutes long. The Piper at one point seemed like it was trying to ditch into the Ann Arbor airport. And it looks like the F-16s were getting ready to shoot it down. But it ended with the Piper complying and the F-16s escorted it towards Canada. WJR 760 AM reported it. And then once everyone saw it, you cannot find it anywhere. Not even on the internet. There's no record of it. It's just gone.
I absolutely 100% remember that.
I do too, because I remember that was one of the reasons that they decided to keep the air traffic grounded for so long, was because of that incident. Because they were like, "What the hell else is going to happen?"
Yeah, especially civilian aircraft. I mean, light aircraft. So yeah. No, I absolutely remember that because I remember thinking somebody wants to fucking die.
Somebody's about to play FNAF.
Right.
Anyway,
so we're talking about missing media tonight, where, as was evidenced by that, things happened, things you absolutely 100% remember, things that should be archived because so much other shit is. But some things just go missing, and it's the stuff that always seems to carry a bit of weight behind it. But not even on a national, not even like with tragedy. There's a comfortable escape hatch built into this that most discussions when you're talking about missing recordings, and it goes something like this. Of course, things vanish during disasters because chaos disrupts systems and overwhelms the infrastructure. That's easy for you to mentally quarantine the problem because tragedy is messy. Therefore, the record is messy and nothing larger needs to be examined. But that's not the case because it happens in pop culture too.
But yeah, so that explanation actually collapses in on itself the moment you widen the lens beyond catastrophe. The same pattern appears in, as you mentioned, just pop culture, entertainment, culture, and programming with no stakes beyond audience reaction, no danger, no urgency, no form of national trauma, no sense of, oh my God, we're all going to die, and still confirmed material fails to survive. When you stack those cases alongside the disaster examples, the disappearance stops looking situational and starts looking structural. Again, I remind you, I do not believe in coincidences. Just saying.
Yeah, the most cited example of this one is Doctor Who. It's precisely because it is so well documented and so unthreatening. Entire serials from the show's early years are missing. It's not rumored missing. It's not disputed. It is officially acknowledged that it's gone. The scripts survive, production stills exist, audio recordings that people captured off the, recording off the TV, the same way we used to record, songs we wanted to hear off the radio. People did that with TV programs and radio programs at the time too. These things all still exist, but the episodes don't.
So the official explanation for all of this is functional and entirely unsatisfying. Videotape was expensive. Storage was limited. Reuse was standard practice. That explains the mechanism, but it doesn't explain the scale. Hundreds of episodes were wiped, not selectively trimmed. The loss was broad, indifferent, and treated as acceptable at the time. Which, for Doctor Who, there had to be some really pissed off Brits for all that. I'm just saying.
You try to watch the first season, the first Doctor on BritBox or something, and it's so disjointed, it's almost unwatchable. And what's striking about these, it's not that these were obscure episodes or they were even bad episodes. They were popular, nationally broadcast, and foundational to a long-running series. Even at the time it was known it was a long-running series. This wasn't just like, oh, we're going to do the first season, the first series, and then, see how it goes. I mean, this well into the third and fourth season, they were wiping first season material for the tape. It's like, the disappearance didn't happen because nobody cared about it. It happened because care was defined so narrowly that preservation wasn't part of the system's self-concept yet.
So the gap between what survives and what doesn't creates a strange after image. Fans can hear performances but never see them. They can read dialogue but never observe delivery. The missing episodes become shapes defined by absence, reconstructed but never resolved. The culture adapts to the loss rather than questioning it. And it's interesting that we're bringing this up because I don't anymore, but I had BritBox for the longest time because it is the only way other than if you want to turn on Pluto and watch them on a loop because they stream BritBox on Pluto to watch the original episodes of Doctor Who, like the old school ones. And I'd never I started watching when Baker was the Doctor, so there was entire seasons there were entire seasons that I had never seen before. So when I realized they were archived, I was like, "You mean I can go back and watch from the beginning?" And dude, I was so confused when I tried to watch the first couple seasons because like I feel like there's a bunch of missing pieces here, but I wasn't really interested in it enough to try to research why I felt like there were missing pieces. So I'm learning something while we're doing the show right now. Cause yeah, I was like that, but now I'm like, dude, that explains why the first couple seasons just seem so weird. Cause it's like it jumps around all over the place, and I was like, these people are on mushrooms or something.
And the weird thing is, the episodes that remain reference the episodes that don't.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the whole thing we're talking about. There's proof the episodes, the things that we're talking about, or the things that are being referenced did exist because they talk about them as if they're part of the canon, but that part of the canon isn't there anymore. Anyway,
see, and that one hits me, and this next one hits me too, because up until the 90s, I watched SNL religiously. See, and in this case, this offers a different flavor to the same problem. SNL is famous for its ephemeral, it has a reputation of just being in the moment, being live, being very topical and then, but that reputation hides an unsettling reality is that there are cold opens. There are sketches and performances that a large number of people, including myself, clearly remember and can describe in detail, but they're unavailable in the official archive. And I even remember modifications when Comedy Central was airing all the old episodes all the time, where I don't remember that, or I remember that differently. And not so much a Mandela effect, but an editing.
So speaking of editing, these weren't always obscure bits that failed and were quietly forgotten. Some were topical, sharp, and heavily discussed at the time. This is back when we had water cooler television that doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah.
Now everybody's watching different things spread out around 4 million different ways to access it. Others involved musical performances that were altered, truncated, or replaced in later broadcasts. The record that survives is not the record that aired. And to me, that just seems wrong. Again, I don't get it.
And a lot of times when you press NBC on this, it's the explanation is given it, it's rights related, musical licensing, performer agreements, contractual limitations, such and such. And while those explanations are plausible, they function as a catch-all because they describe why something cannot be shown, it doesn't explain why it can't be preserved internally.
Yeah, I've often wondered that, but that does bring up an interesting point because remember when in the early 80s when they started trying to incorporate pop music into television and shows like Knight Rider and Airwolf that tried to use a few wound up getting permission to use covers because they couldn't afford the licensing rights to the original music. But the thing, and this came up with WKRP. WKRP had the rights to use the music that it used in its first run programming. But that's why if you find it in syndication a lot now, you'll notice that there's a handful of songs that you're like, that's not what was played in the original episode when they were going into or coming back from a break. But I think so that is plausible to a point. But like the music stuff, I can kind of understand because until Miami Vice hit the scene, nobody was really willing in TV to pay for the permanent licensing rebroadcast use. But for Miami Vice, and there was like one other one, the music was such an integral part of it. That's when they started figuring out how to do permanent licensing, which is supposedly a thing. But as somebody who does podcasting, that doesn't really exist. Because I still run into it all the time where I'll get something flagged and they'll be like, well, that was really only supposed to cover first run. I'm like, dude, it's a podcast. Get over yourself. This is my license information. But anyway, so that's why I'm kind of enjoying Suno and figuring out how to make my own music, because I'm slowly just creating an archive of stuff that we can use instead of me having to dispute copyright strikes all the time. But that's a story for another day. But yeah. But so what all this really leads to is kind of fragmented culture memory, which honestly could lead to some of the confusion that we deal with on a regular basis, because viewers remember a version of the show that no longer exists, while new audiences encounter a sanitized archive that presents itself as definitive. The mismatch is rarely addressed directly, and it's treated as an inconvenience rather than a distortion. And then you've got, this is the part they don't talk about. So you've got the people who remember seeing it the way it was. You've got the people that were exposed to it in the new way, and they're arguing with each other because, well, that's not what I saw, and blah, 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 blah. You're like, yeah, well, you didn't see it the first time, and that's why I remember it. Well, that's not possible. So, like I said, same thing we're dealing with right now all over social media.
Sure.
It's just crazy.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, and I'm sure that leads to more than a few, Mandela effects as well. Doesn't explain all of them, but, and what matters with this, it's not nostalgia. It's the repeated narrowing of the record. Each time a sketch is aired or removed, the archive becomes less representative of what actually aired. And the system prefers a stable, defensible version of itself, but not a complete one.
Oh, so yeah. Speaking of which, shameless plug, we have an archive of this. We've done this radio broadcast that I'm about to talk about ourselves, so you guys should go check that out. So the War of the Worlds radio broadcast is often invoked as a singular historical event, but that framing hides an important detail. The famous 1938 broadcast was not experienced uniformly. Local stations interrupted it. Regional announcers reacted differently. Some markets reportedly altered or reframed the ending based on unfolding public reactions.
Yeah, and in that case, because this was put out and he had, all radio was live then. You had some markets, some radio stations that were rebroadcasting, leaning into it, giving their own local reports. You had other ones completely backpedaling the whole thing, making sure you absolutely knew clearly and in no uncertain terms this was a fictional broadcast. But and the thing is that newspapers from this period reference these regional variations explicitly. They describe panic in some areas and calm in others. The confusion shaped by how local broadcasters chose to contextualize what listeners were hearing. And these descriptions imply that there were a multitude of versions of the reality of the broadcast experience.
Well, and in fact, there were, because of the regionality of this time. And one of the Mandela effects that we talked about the last time we did the Mandela effect is the Christmas song, where it's "You can count on me" or "You can plan on me." And what causes people to completely just have a brain skip with that is regionality was such a thing back then that they would actually release different versions with sometimes colloquial language. So in parts of the country, they would say you can count on me. And in other parts of the country, which sounds completely, I'm not going to lie, it sounds completely retarded to me, but apparently it was how they spoke back then. They would say you can plan on me. And I mean, if he would have said you can plan on me being there, that contextually would have made a lot more sense to me. But so that itself, I think, does lend to some of these things that wind up being categorized as a Mandela effect. Is the early days of broadcasting were so much more of a regional thing because it was all happening live. I mean, I've talked about it on other shows. There were no reruns back in the day. Like nobody even knew what that was. Desi Arnaz was a genius. Desi Arnaz bought the rebroadcast rights to I Love Lucy before anybody knew what a rebroadcast was, and then put it in the execs' ears that during those few summer weeks that we're not doing television, you could be rerunning these things.
Right.
And then he sold them back the rights to run the show in the summer months. Dude was a genius. I wish I would have
He
been
was
alive.
absolutely genius. He shaped he shaped what we knew as television in so many ways. It's insane.
It's just crazy to think about, really, because TV wouldn't be what it was today without that
But-
one of those first real power couples of Hollywood, which wound up being Lucy and Desi. But it's
Yeah, I
just
put that in
crazy.
past tense because TV doesn't exist today.
Yeah, not really.
Yeah, but the thing is, those regional broadcasts, they're gone. And what survives is the national narrative and a single canonical recording. The variability, the way the event actually propagated through different communities, it's all flattened. The system retains one version that can be replayed and explained while discarding the ones that complete the story. The reason why Orson Welles was called in front of Congress. It seems insane when you think about it. You don't know about how every region played into it differently. And that's why, without that context, it just seems that Congress is being insane. And yes, it was in one respect, but the fact of the matter remains that without the context of knowing that, I'm going to pull this out of my ass. Topeka, Kansas decided to lean heavily into it and was talking about their own Martians in the corn, whatever, fuck. And then people were freaking out. Was that?
Turnip fields, sir. Turnip fields.
Whatever. Yeah, turnip field. No, that was in Grover's Mill, New Jersey. So then you wonder, it's like, well, why were people freaking out about this? Well, it was good, and some of the regions leaned into it.
Yeah,
for
you
fun.
had certain
without the
certain news
context.
directors that were more creative than others, and they're like, "Hey, this is fun. Let's lean into it." And everybody, I'm sure a lot of folks got called in the carpet on the local level too. Be like, "Why the hell did you do that?" Seemed like a good idea at the time.
But yeah. These examples matter precisely because they lack obvious motive. There's no need to suppress or conceal or protect anything in these examples we've given. The missing material posed no threat to a narrative. It wasn't classified or dangerous or controversial. It was just not in any way that would justify its removal. It's just gone.
It didn't survive. You know what this reminds you? Remember the line from the Borg? Resistance is futile. Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our own. I kind of feel like the broadcast heads had a similar line that they would always come at people with. Your regional and dialectical distinctiveness will be added to our own and sanitized for your pleasure, or something along those lines, or for your ease of remembrance. I don't know, but yeah, I don't know this whole the whole throwing everything into a meat grinder and bringing out this clean, sanitized version of events. Anyway. So. But this is the point where the disaster only explanation fails completely. If disappearance were purely a function of chaos, cultural programming would be overrepresentative in archives, not underrepresented. Entertainment should be easy to keep. It's controlled, scheduled, and produced under stable conditions. Instead, the same thing occurs. Early episodes are missing. One-night performances vanish. Variants collapse into a single preserved form. The system behaves consistently across contexts that have nothing, absolutely nothing else in common.
What links all of this? It's not the content, but the process. Broadcast systems, especially in their earliest forms, they were designed to transmit, not to remember. Preservation was secondary, selective, and reactive. The only material that fit within the emerging standards of value was reusability, was retained. And that's why you look at it and you say, well, how come this weird commercial from 1968 remains? because they probably ran that thing for 5 years and then somebody threw the tape in a drawer. But again, that, it's just so weird on what remains and what doesn't. The attrition almost seems intentional.
Well, speaking of commercials, I have to bring this one up because I saw this one online the other day and I was dying. It was a tampon commercial from like 1960s, 1970s. Chick is making tea and realizes she put the wrong string in the wrong place. If you get my meaning, Mr. Frodo.
Yeah.
I was like, I can't even believe that commercial would have ever been allowed to air, but here it is. That's just crazy. But so over time, those standards have all hardened. Archives grew, policies changed, and retention improved, but the early losses were never recovered. And the logic that allowed them never fully disappeared. It just became less visible, probably because there were people getting really pissed off about stuff that was missing. So they did try to clean it up a little bit, but it still happens.
Well, yeah, but it's cultural loss is easier to tolerate because it feels so low stakes. A missing episode doesn't threaten the identity, anybody's threaten their identity or the history or anything. It becomes a trivial, and a footnote in documentaries. But that tolerance trains audiences to accept absence without interrogation. So when the big things go missing, you don't seem to notice either.
So I know we keep trying not to assign any type of malevolence to this, but this next one kind of feeds into my thinking of maybe we've been being trained to accept when things go missing, because once that acceptance is in place, it carries over. The same shrug that greets a missing sketch can greet a missing broadcast segment. The distinction between entertainment and documentation blurs, not because they are the same, but because the system treats them with the same indifference once their immediate usefulness expires. So in a lot of ways, when things, even though there are these little prickly things that pop up in the back of our minds when something comes up and we're like, hey, that's not how I remember it, because we have been conditioned to this idea, well, not everything can be archived, not everything can be retained. We don't often ask questions unless you're people like me and you that can't ever seem to let things go. So I wonder how it's just one of those things where I keep trying not to make it sound malevolent or on purpose, but I feel like it's a long form of conditioning. I don't want to think that. I don't want to think that, but that's what I'm feeling right now.
But that's why the discomfort in this, deepens, is that even harmless, beloved cultural artifacts are allowed to evaporate without resistance. Then the disappearance, it's not an exception. It's the baseline behavior of the system.
So the record we inherit is not a mirror of what happened. It is a distillation. It has been narrowed by policy, streamlined by practicality and preference. What survives is what the system found stable enough to carry forward. And again, I'm really trying not to go there tonight, but I still feel like this is a form of conditioning. I can't let that go.
Well, and that's the thing, because we did the big important things, 9/11, Challenger, and Kennedy and such. But it's even talking about Doctor Who and Saturday Night Live. These things weren't. It's like I said earlier, they weren't dangerous. They weren't classified, and still they didn't survive. And once you acknowledge that, you've got no place to hide. The phenomenon is no longer quarantined to tragedy or technical failure. It extends into every day. Even the playful and the familiar. Nothing can survive this attrition.
And once you start realizing that it can and does impact everything from national tragedy events to regional emergencies to everyday pop cultural events, at that point, the question shifts. It's no longer about why specific recordings are missing. It becomes more about why are we so willing to accept a record that keeps shedding pieces of itself and still calling itself the whole.
That's really the most damning thing about it, is that we know pieces are missing, and we're okay with it.
Yeah. That's
the royal we, not,
Yeah, no, I get it. But yeah, no, trust me, that like I said, that's one of my biggest things is when there's something that doesn't make sense inside me brain, I can't let it go. And the more we talk about this, the more I'm like, okay, so it happens in almost everything, large scale, small scale, pervasively. So it again, how much of this was some sort of a conditioning exercise? We're going to train you not to ask questions by making you used to things disappearing.
Right.
Anyway, so that's the thought I'm going to leave you guys chewing on while we go to break. We've got one last one to play for the night, and I think, yeah, for some reason lately it's been putting them up in reverse, but I did find the right one. All right, so this is the Act 2 song from Jeff for the night, and here we go.
Say it again, say it clean, say it like it never hurt. Say it slow, say it calm, say it till it sounds rehearsed. You don't have to touch a thing, you don't have to make a move, just keep telling it the same till it sounds like something true. I was there, I heard it wrong, I guess it means I didn't hear. Funny how the mess disappears once the ending's clear. Nothing missing, nothing wrong. That's the line you always use. If it doesn't play back right, then it's probably confused. You don't lose it, you don't cut it, you don't throw it. I've heard every version now. If this existed, you can keep it. I don't recognize it anyhow. You didn't hide it, you didn't lie. You just stayed long enough to be right. Anymore.
So now I'm officially back because I had to mute. I forgot I muted while I was sneezing and then forgot I was muted. So anyway, we're back. Hope you guys enjoyed that song. And based on a comment in the chat, this has to happen now. Where's the kaboom? There was supposed to be a loud, earth-shattering kaboom. Okay, I feel better now. Welcome back, folks. How you doing? How was your break, Amish?
Yeah, I got to talk about that song for a minute, not only because it fucking jammed, but and you could chalk this up to how much we all work together and with each other and listen to each other's shows and everything. Jeff never gets the final draft when I'm working on these shows. If it's an obscure topic like this or something that isn't easily defined, I'll give him an outline for it, and how the show's going to flow and everything. Listening to the lyrics of the songs he did tonight, because again, this isn't your usual, show that, kind of flavor of our show. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It's not one of the big topics, goblins, cryptids, UFO, shit like that.
Don't put that juice on.
His lyrics are fucking pull quotes from my documents sometimes. It's just amazing because, like I said, it's because we work together so much. As he knows what I'm going to say, probably.
Well, there's
something I'm going to highlight, and
there's another less public reason that this works. We both know you two share a brain, so there's that.
Well, that too.
So,
which is weird because I also share a brain with Vincent Charles, which means I have no brain of my own. I just have half of Jeff's and half of VC's.
Well, no,
and
it's in
some of yours too, which is weird also. So
well, it's in quarters, but my quarter's the weirdest part, so that's why.
Scary there.
Yeah, don't go there very often. Trust me, it's scary in here. You don't want to be there very often. I'm just saying. All right. So back into the program, finishing out the final segment. By this point, the instinct to demand an answer becomes hard to resist. The cases have stacked. The losses recur across formats, decades, and levels of importance. It feels like the moment where an explanation should arrive to relieve the pressure. That instinct is precisely what needs to be resisted because the pattern exists whether or not it's named. And trust me, there's no direct explanation coming because they probably don't want you to have one.
Right. And it's what can be described cleanly and cautiously is it's a behavior this, systems that record reality do not preserve it evenly. But they do fail, but they don't fail at random. Over time, they converge towards a narrower version of events that feels coherent and repeatable and then even, defensible. And everything outside that narrowing either degrades, fragments, or just completely disappears.
So institutions rarely set out to erase, or so they want you to believe. They set out to function. Preservation is shaped by utility, not completeness. Material that can be replayed without raising new questions is favored. Material that resists framing, that contradicts later understanding, or that exposes uncertainty is quietly and usually very quickly deprioritized.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't a conspiracy claim. What it is. It's an observable operational bias. Archives are designed to support continuity, not discomfort. They hold what reinforces the story the system now understands itself to be telling. The raw material, the raw footage threatens that stability because it belongs to a moment before the understanding calcified.
The record, as it moves forward in time, behaves like a funnel. Early on, it's wide, chaotic, and quite contradictory. As time passes, the funnel narrows. Variants collapse into a single version. Peripheral recordings drop away. What remains feels authoritative because it survived the narrowing process. I feel like we're describing the quickening. There could be only one version.
Yeah. Well, and that authority is seductive. It reassures us that the past is knowable, that events resolved cleanly, that confusion was brief and contained, and the missing material challenges that comfort. It implies that uncertainty was not a passing phase, but a foundational condition.
Raw recordings are especially vulnerable because they capture reality before it has been metabolized. They show people reacting without scripts, institutions operating without policy, and narratives failing to cohere. These moments are not just messy, They're unstable inputs into systems that require stability to operate and, in most cases, to even remain in existence.
Yeah, once an explanation exists, the earlier confusion becomes redundant at best or corrosive at worst. It doesn't add value to the official understanding, it actually undermines it. So the system doesn't actively destroy it, it simply stops caring whether it survives.
This is how disappearance can occur without malice. No memo needs to be written. No Order 66 needs to go out. Material that does not serve the present quietly loses its advocates. Tapes aren't copied, files aren't migrated, formats become obsolete. Time does the job for them.
Yeah, and from the outside, this looks like neglect, but from the inside, it just feels like efficiency. Even still, with boundless amounts of storage, resources are still finite. Choices must be made. The archive can't hold everything, so it holds what fits the narrative.
But what becomes unsettling about this is how consistent this behavior is. It doesn't matter whether the content is tragic or trivial, national or local, visual or audio. If it complicates the story rather than reinforcing it, its chances of survival are next to zero.
Yeah, and at this stage, three broad possibilities present themselves, and none of them really resolve anything. One possibility is psychological convergence. Human beings, individually and collectively, prefer stable narratives. We remember the version of events that makes the most sense, not the version that reflects how disorientated we actually were. Archives built by humans inherit that bias, and over time, the record aligns with memory rather than memory aligning with the record.
So it's interesting because science kind of reinforces some of what we're talking about right now. Like I don't know if I know you probably know this, but I don't know if any of the listeners do. But our brain has a very hard time constructing faces. It pulls cues from a bunch of different things, and that's why there are people that actually have a disability where they can't see faces at all. All they see is a blur. And our brain, to make things as normal as possible, will extrapolate different information from different places to give us the most stable version of our reality that it can present to us. So it isn't like this just happens in the stuff that we're talking about tonight. This is something that actually happens almost every single day in your brain and in my brain. That's like for me, because of my limp, my brain will try to filter some of that out, because if it didn't, I would get sick every time I walked, because I don't walk like everybody else does. So it does the best it can to filter out the fact that I pull to the left when I'm moving, because other people will sometimes notice it. And to me, I'm so used to it now that my brain filters most of it out. So half the time I feel like I'm walking normal, even though I'm really not. And that thought just occurred to me. So this isn't just something that's institutional. This is something that's kind of baked into how we exist. So I guess in that sense, it actually does kind of make a little bit more sense.
Well, and another aspect of that too, it's something that we've talked about, on various topics, is that 9/11 survivors, they took a group of them and they were immediately interviewed right after the events. And then they were interviewed again 5 and 10 years later. And when they got to the 5 and 10-year mark, it didn't happen with everybody at that point, but by the 10-year mark, almost all of them said, I don't know why I said that at the time. That didn't happen, which makes you wonder if that actually did happen. And then they've now had their memory reinforced with the constant barrage of the narrative, to where their actual events of the day now comport with the greater, what everybody else remembers, not what they remember at the time.
Well, kind of tying into this very same thing, another possibility that causes some of the stuff we're talking about is what would be considered institutional narrowing. Organizations evolve towards self-consistency. They preserve what supports their legitimacy and coherence. Early mistakes, uncertainty, and improvisation are tolerated in the moment, but quietly excised from the long-term record. The archives become a retrospective performance of competence, and that is actually what triggered what I brought up a minute ago, because this is exactly what in most cases our brain does with our reality. So the fact that we try to do that with the world around us since it happens internally to us. I guess that does to me kind of make it make a little bit more sense. It's kind of scary at the same time, but still.
Yeah. What's the third possibility is probably the most unsettling one because it lacks a clean mechanism. And it suggests that there is something about raw reality, unprocessed, unresolved, contradictory, that systems just cannot absorb without distortion. Not because they're malicious or incompetent, but because their structure demands closure where none exists.
And these possibilities are not mutually exclusive. As a matter of fact, what I've been discussing that our brain does would kind of be a blend of two and three. These may reinforce each other. Psychological comfort aligns with institutional need, and both are satisfied by a record that trims away instability. The result looks intentional, even when it isn't, and in some cases, it might even be subconscious.
And what matters with all this, it's the outcome, not the motive. The outcome is a historical record that grows more polished as it grows more incomplete. The rough drafts vanish, the final copy remains. We inherit the conclusion without the process.
And this creates a
This
subtle.
creates a subtle. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
You're fine. You're good. You.
Okay,
Go.
so this creates a subtle illusion of inevitability. Events appear to unfold towards outcomes that now seem obvious. The dead ends, the false starts, the moments where things could have gone differently are no longer visible. History feels cleaner than it ever was. Kind of like the difference between the skyline of the 70s versus the skylines of today.
Right.
Just to give you a visual.
Yeah. See, the thing is the missing media it's not an anomaly within the system. It's a symptom. It marks the places where reality exceeded the system's ability to package it cleanly. These excesses don't disappear because they were dangerous, but because they're inconvenient.
And there's no, well, other than some alphabet agencies, maybe, but there's no villain to point to here, or is there? No single archive, network, or agency is responsible, but are they responsible collectively? The behavior emerges from the way recording systems interact with time, memory, and authority. It is structural, not personal. In the words of my friend the Amish, embrace the power of and.
Embrace the power of ad, yeah. And once again, we're tempted to normalize this. To say that, of course, not everything survives. And this is simply just the cost of doing business and existing in a world that runs 24/7, 365. The response is to treat loss as, neutral and final when it's neither.
Loss leaves shape, leaves gaping holes, huge questions that leave gaps that don't close simply because we stop looking at them. The absence itself becomes data once it appears often enough in the same places. And this is why these persistent questions exist. And this is why that's part of the reason why this show exists, is because of these persistent questions and trying to figure out why there's so many things that get deleted from the permanent record, and why do they?
Yeah, and the danger, it's not that the system lies. It's that it forgets selectively and then presents that forgetting as completeness. And we trust that we trust the records are whole. But completeness is the first casualty in all of it.
And remember, what disappears in most cases isn't random. It's what the system couldn't metabolize. That's a heavy thought there. I'm going to have to ponder that one for a minute.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, because with you saying that, it leaves one final discomfort hanging in the air. It's unresolved by design. If the record keeps what it can digest and discards what it can't, then the missing media isn't just about the past. It's about the limits of the system we trust to remember reality for us all.
And dude, with some of the topics that we've kind of been banting about the last few weeks, how much of our reality is actually subjective when there's the concept of decisions you make now are impacting things that happened to you 5 hours ago?
Right. And that's what I was and that's what I was getting at the beginning of this, is how this topic touches on three topics that we cover here. We've already talked about the Mandela effect. And you just brought up the other one that, the past, and since we found out at the quantum level, um, time is not only bilinear but multidimensional. And with the
I don't
future
I don't
informing the past as much as the past informs the future, this is once again reality collapsing down what was necessary in order to make the future collapsing the past down to the most likely outcome of the future. But the third thing that this touches on, and when I kept using the word system when I was preparing this, I realized that I was talking about unintentionally until I was rereading this, for completeness, and went, I'm talking about simulation theory.
So yeah, I don't remember the last time I felt the need to do this unless Jeff was on, but bilinear time makes me want to hit a particular button. Giggity giggity, giggity goo. Just saying. Kind of sounds dirty.
It does kind of sound dirty.
Oh.
The thing is we trust these records because they feel solid. They sit still, they don't argue back, and they present themselves as the finished objects. And it's implying that what we're seeing is what there is to see. But it's not naive, it's trained. It's not naivety. We've been trained to that. From our early education on, we are taught to treat archival material as the end point of inquiry rather than just one phase of the process.
Exactly. And I think that's part of why it disturbs me so much, realizing how much information has been being weeded out over time, because that's the whole point of the history classes and everything else is these are the final things that we're discussing. This is everything that we know, everything that we understand, and we're leaving out so many different so many different bits and pieces over time to try to give us some sanitized view of it. But in this instance of what we're talking about tonight, so the cases that we've just walked through don't challenge the accuracy of surviving records. They challenge the assumption of completeness. They suggest that what we inherit is not a neutral mirror of the past, but a curated residue shaped by systems that favor stability over fidelity. That distinction matters more than any individual missing tape. And this goes back to some of the stuff that I've been talking about, even on the Daily Show, like the fact that everything that we were told about the real reason why the Pilgrims and the Indians went to war was false. It was the Indians that got pissed off at the Pilgrims because Christianity was changing their culture, and the chiefs didn't like it. But nobody talks about that part of it because it doesn't fit the sanitized version of the narrative that was created over time.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was all kumbaya. Here, have a turkey and some pumpkins. But and that's actually where the mythic layer kind of creeps in here. Cultures have always warned about forbidden texts, lost chronicles, or erased names. Not because they believed that the knowledge was fragile, but because they believed the systems were. The warnings were never the truth will vanish. The warnings were always the truth will be filtered. And we've been talking about that in one form or another on almost every one of these shows we do.
Pretty much. In light of that, missing media stops being an oddity of the analog age and starts looking like a diagnostic. It marks the points where reality exceeded the narrative bandwidth of the moment, where too many things were true at once, where explanation lagged behind experience.
It's too many reality. Going back to the bilinear time, multidimensional time, too many realities existed at once, and so the system needed to collapse it. It's the danger isn't that we don't know everything. No society ever has. I mentioned that earlier. The danger is that we forget once we knew less and felt more and hesitated longer. That forgetting makes the past look cleaner than it was and the present more inevitable than it is.
Records do not just preserve events. They teach us how uncertainty is supposed to look. When the uncertain parts are missing, we absorb a false lesson that confusion is brief. God, is that ever true? That clarity arrives quickly, that history snaps into focus almost immediately. And anyone who has lived through a real event knows that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Sorry, had to be done.
And I guess what we can take away from all this is that If the record explains itself too cleanly, that should worry you. But if it resists explanation, if it shows seams and gaps and absences, that resistance is not a flaw. It's evidence that you're in contact with actual reality.
And if it can,
That's my final word on the topic.
well, I mean, just a couple little final tidbits here, because one of the things that has kind of become apparent is if the stuff that we're talking about, whether it's pop culture, historical, you know, tragic events, whatever the case may be, if it explains itself, it dies. If it resists explanation, it lives. And yeah, so yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so did this show, because we'll be back in 2 weeks. Oh, any final thoughts, Amish?
I just, I kind of hit him earlier with the fact that I was just amazed as I was working on this, how this show could have been titled with a Mandela effect. It could have been titled with, simulation theory. It fits into both of those categories just as well as the simulation theory and Mandela effect touch on each other. We could be talking about artifacts here, or the lack of artifacts in that case. And it's just it wasn't until I finished this doc that I really went, this is a bridge show.
Yeah. And yeah, but well, interestingly, because even though it was kind of an underlying theme, but never really anything that was brought fully to the surface, it kind of this ties into something else that's been kind of rattling back and forth in my brain, because there's now conflicting theories about whether or not we live in a simulation, and something has occurred to me based on one of the stories that I shared with you a few weeks ago, where CERN is basically now apparently admitting that not only do we know that there are other dimensions, but in a simulation that has proven that, they have now been able to verify that not only is there another dimension, but that other dimension is now aware that we're observing them. So maybe that's where the simulation theory comes in, because if there are multiple dimensions and the one dimension is aware that we're observing them, what if there's another dimension that's been observing us and we're just not to the point where we can actually recognize that we are being observed yet?
Well, taking a bong hit, and then before I say this next thing, is that you have to wonder, does that mean that we are viewing the simulation and is now we are aware that we are viewing it, or that we are the simulation and we are aware that we are being observed?
You just said what I was trying to say much better, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
That's kind of where I was trying to go, and I couldn't get it out of my brain. So that was well done, sir. Thank you. This is one of those chicken and the egg things, kind of is where I was going.
Right. Yeah, I don't want to spiral into simulation theory because it's late and I'm too tired to get into that. But yeah, it's just I'm just, while I was doing this, I was just putting it on, when I was putting all this together, and I'm looking at the things that are missing. And I know I beat on this through the show too, but the things that are missing are so random, but in ways that they're very important, because they're touchstone moments. But there's other touchstone moments that don't have this attrition. It's just really weird on how selective it is. And it's selectiveness that's the pattern. It makes you wonder, okay, so the ones that you do have all the chaos surrounding it, is that reality? And then the ones that we, assume as fact, that's not the reality.
Yeah, I mean that's one of those. It's weird because, like you said, it's so random, but at the same time, the fact that it is random leads more credence to there's just something else going on that we don't really understand. But before I do the whole usual handoff of where folks can find you, I just have to point this out because this makes me really really happy. So if you add up the 3 feeds that we're running on, we are currently kicking GB News's ass by like over 200. So that makes me happy. Because that's one of those places with a really big budget, and we're kicking their ass right now. So I like that. Anyway,
600 of you tonight. That's amazing. Thank you so much for tuning into our little show here. That's great for a Saturday night. And
yeah, Saturday night with everybody recovering from back-to-back holidays. That's pretty good. So
yeah. So awesome.
All right, so we can get out of here.
Jeff, music tonight absolutely fucking jammed. I can't stress that enough. I loved both those songs. Really. I keep telling you, you got to make a compilation album of Juxtaposition music.
Actually, I was going to talk to him about that because I actually, now that I have a distribution program that I can use, I can actually put out music for different groups now. So I was actually going to, since I have access to them anyway, I was going to talk to him about getting that set up and just put it out as an album. And I can even split it up to where he gets most of the lion's share of the money if we start making it, since he made them. So that's one of the reasons why it took me so long to find a group to put them out through, because I wanted to find one that does all the bits and pieces that I needed it to do.
Nice.
But I wanted to test it with my work first, because I've noticed with the store that we have for the merch as a test, because I wanted to see what happened. The first payout came out within like 3 weeks. The second one's been hung up now for like 4 months, because I was actually going to take half of that and send it back over to Jeff, and I'm still waiting on it to come in. So that's another reason why I was experimenting with my own music to see how this works before I start putting anybody else's content up, and then nobody gets paid for it. So we may be looking for another store soon, because I have a ticket open with them still. But anyway, that's an after the show thing. So anyway, where can folks find you, sir?
This week is my light week. You can find me Tuesday night on Manorama with you and Vincent Charles and Texas. What were we calling them? Texas Red
Texas
Shirt.
Spider-Man.
Yeah, formerly Canadian Spider-Man. Let's see. And maybe some other random Canadian, or even Steve will show up. Wednesday, you can find me on Toxic Masculinity with you, G, and Aggie. And then after that, later in the evening, you can find me again with you on Rick and Orty. And you, as always, surprisingly, you can still find me as Ordnance Packard on Twitter.
Nice.
And also coming soon, we have a Jeff will be the DM for myself, Vincent Charles, the EP, Delaney, and Janie Mack are going to be doing a D&D campaign.
Yeah, I actually am really curious about how that goes, because I used to love to play D&D back in the day, but I just, as much as I was like, dude, I was like, I don't have the time. I really, really want to be part of it, but I just don't have the time, and I'm sad about it. But I'm glad EP is going to be part of it, so I will definitely be tuning in for that. As far as me, you can find me at RadioRick73. You can follow along with everything we do here at KLR Radio on X, YouTube, Facebook, and Rumble. And I almost said Twitter, but I already said X. You can also find us at klrradio.com. You can find me tomorrow night doing a Digital Beacon US special presentation about the Iran situation, and are we finally going to see are we finally going to see the pendulum there swing back the other way? I may or may not have a special guest. I'm still trying to confirm. I got busy today and forgot to touch base, so I'll have to try to do that in the morning. And then Monday night, America Off the Rails. Tuesday, the Daily Show starts back up again. Rick Robinson, 10 a.m. Tuesday night, hanging out with the Manorama panel. Unless one of my kids calls me broken down again. I really hope that doesn't happen. And then Wednesday nights, Toxic Masculinity, then pushing buttons for a bunch of other folks, and then hanging out with you. And then Thursday night, hopefully Jen and Rick will be back. She's actually delved into the world of politics, though, so I've been waiting for her to let me know when she's ready, because she's learning how to do a whole new thing. And the fact that she's doing one of the things that I keep telling everybody to do and finding ways to get involved, kind of like with what you do, I'm just kind of letting that kind of work itself out as we go. And other than that, for anything else, feel free to check the schedule, because I am involved in about 75% of the content one way or the other around here. And you can find me as a contributor on twitchy.com, misfitspolitics.com, and the loftusparty.com. I also produce the Loftus Party podcast, which drops on Tuesdays. And I have music drops coming out every Wednesday for the next 3 weeks. from the KLRN Radio House Band through the new label Kung Fu Productions. So, yay, be on the lookout for those.
One thing I forgot to mention, I don't know why it slipped my mind. Tomorrow I am on the Vincent Charles Project, where we will be, myself, Jeff, Vincent, and Janelle Waz will be discussing the magnificence that is Hard Ticket to Hawaii.
I love how you're like, I don't know why you do this slips your mind every Saturday night. You always circle back to these.
I don't know why. I remember it on like our day show, but the day before the show, it's just Adam as well. You know,
it happens.
Anyway.
All right, folks, we're going to get out of here. Enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you so much for all of you that hung out with us. For those of you that have been asking me, the archives will get starting to be caught back up again tomorrow. I've had a lot of stuff going on and a lot of different things and a lot of different projects that I'm trying to get done. So that is on my list of things to do with tomorrow after I get the notes put together for the special show. So all the archives should hopefully be back up and running and somewhat back to normal, either completely tomorrow or spaced out over tomorrow and Monday. But we're going to get out of here because I know he's tired. I know I'm tired. And I know it's Saturday night and you guys don't want to hear me just sit here rambling. So see you guys tomorrow. Bye, everybody.
Hail Hydra.
No hailing of the Hydra. We've had
Hail the Hydras.